let's go one step further. We're talking about Muhammad and Jesus. Jesus on this side, Muhammad over here. And Jesus is in the prophetic line. And this is the prophetic line that we're looking for. And it's a prophetic line that is instituted right there in Genesis, where we see very clearly when Abraham comes to God and he says, what about my son Ishmael? And God says, listen, I'll bless Ishmael. He says in verse 21 and 22, he will be the father of 12 nations. But my covenant is with Isaac. My covenant is with Isaac. So there you see the prophetic line started. So here's the first question. So who's in that prophetic line? Right away you see there's a problem here. Muhammad over here is in the line of Ishmael. He's not in the covenant line. He'll be blessed, and Ishmael will have 12 sons, but nowhere is there any covenant for him. So already he's not in that prophetic line. Genesis 17 is very clear. That should show you right there, but it gets even better. Because then in chapter 22, God comes to Abraham, and he doesn't just ask once. He asks 1, 2, 3 times in one chapter, give me your one and only son. He had 2 sons. Did God make a mistake here? Did God forget about the other son? No, God knew exactly what he was saying. As far as God was concerned, Abraham only had 1 son, and that's the son he provided. Ishmael was provided by Sarah through Hagar. That's man trying to do God's work for him, because God had promised Sarah that she would have a child, and she was waiting. And finally, she got fed up and she said, here, take my Hagar. Well, that's what men want to do for God all the time. And God was saying, no, I promised, I am fulfilled, you only have 1 son. So immediately you see that this son over here, Isaac, is the only one that we're to look at. Now let's go to Galatians 4. Galatians 4, you now have our good old friend Paul. What does Paul do? He said there are 2 women that represent 2 different groups. One is the free woman over here, Rachel, who is the mother of the free woman. And then there's Hagar over here, a slave woman from Arabia. Isn't that interesting? Who represents the slave woman, who represents those who are persecuting this free woman. And then what did Paul say here? You are of the free woman. You have to have nothing to do with the slave woman's son. We're going to have nothing to do with Ishmael. So Muhammad comes in that line. We're to have nothing to do with Muhammad. That's the first problem. Second, there are 4 things that every prophet must do. The first one, he must be in the prophetic line. We've eradicated that one. Secondly, his revelation must correspond with that which has come before. Look at the Qur'an. It is full of contradiction over and over and over again. It contradicts, it confuses all the prophets. It doesn't have the same story that we have in the Bible. And it contradicts about who God is. The fact that God cannot enter time and space. Our God can enter time and space. Why can't theirs? Obviously, it's not the same God even. It doesn't even know, it doesn't even know what happened with Jesus. And here's where it really comes down. Look at the Quran and look at the Bible on Jesus. Over here, the Quran is very clear that this Jesus did things as a little child that I never heard of before. Making birds out of clay and blowing on them so they fly up in the air. Speaking from the cradle. Bending down trees so his mother can eat. That's not in my Bible. So it's not even the same Jesus. It's not even the same name. So you can see, whoever this Muhammad was, if he did receive this Quran, he's got the wrong stories, and that's very clear. And then, most importantly, he absolutely contradicts the Bible, because the Jesus we do know, the historical Jesus, he got up on the cross, and he died on the cross, and rose again on the 3rd day. In one verse in the book that this prophet received, chapter 4, verse 157, it said, for they killed him not, nor did they slay him. They thought it was so, for truly he was not crucified. That shuts down the crucifixion. That shuts down my Jesus. And that means we're all damned. We're still damned for eternity, because God has not yet come to atone for our sins. That's why I want nothing to do with that man. I want nothing to do with that God. And I want nothing to do with that book. So when you look and see between these 2, a prophetic line, that eradicates. But then now we're getting probably to the last 2. The last 2, Jesus could do miracles. Could Muhammad do one miracle? Not one. Jesus could do prophecy. Did Muhammad do any prophecy? Not one. Every prophet should either do miracles or prophecy. Why couldn't Muhammad do either? Proving he wasn't a prophet. And then the last thing, and this is the most important thing. Every prophet knew what God he represented. Am I correct? Yes. When Moses was on his way down to, he didn't want to go down to Israel at all. To Egypt to get the Israelites out. And he strived 5 times. He tried to make excuse after excuse. Please don't send me out. Let Aaron go down to my place. Finally, he turns to God. He says, okay, what's your name? Tell me your name. So when I go down there, they'll know what God I represent. That's pretty important, that you represent the right God, because there are a multiplicity of gods at that time. And God gave him his name. Just 4 letters, Yahweh. And then what does he say next? This shall be my name from generation to generation, this shall be my name forever, which means it's still his name today. There are three names for God in the Old Testament. You have Adonai, which is the descriptive name. That's about 330 times. And then you have Elohim, which is about 2,000 times. And Elohim is interesting because that is the generic name. And then finally you have the personal name for God, the name that was given to Moses there, Yahweh. Now ask yourself, how many times do you find Yahweh in the Old Testament? 6,823 times. Doesn't that suggest to you that this is the most important name for God? This is his personal name. This is a unique name. This is his holy name. So holy the Jews won't even pronounce it. And yet, if that is the case, every prophet knew that name. Jesus knew that name. He appropriated it for himself in John 8, verse 58. How can Muhammad, who doesn't even know that name, be called a prophet? Can you see? That throws him out of prophethood. He's not in the prophetic line. His material completely contradicted all the other prophets. He did nothing to prove he was a prophet, and he didn't even know what God he represented.